Hello everyone. So today I'm going to be doing a lesson on solving radical equations. So solving a radical equation is going to be the same as solving any other equation. Whenever you got to move something, you do the inverse of it, or the opposite. So if we have a square root and we want to solve for x, and there's nothing else outside the root, because you always have to get the radical by itself first. Well, that's already done for us here, and it's actually done for us in all these problems. We'll get the hard ones later. You do the opposite of a square root. Well, the opposite of a square root is squaring it. And then you cancel that out and you get the inside. So we just square both sides. And we get x equals 10 squared, which is 100. Now, you could probably do a couple of these in your head, but it's good to know the algebra of how to actually solve it in the end. So here we have the radical by itself, so we square both sides. That goes away and we get 2x equals 9 squared is 81. And then divide both sides by 2. We got our answer, 81 over 2, because you can't reduce it, so we're done. Same case here. So we square both sides. Remember, you're squaring the entire side, so that's going to become a positive 4. And then subtract 1. So we get x equals 3. But for any of these problems, you should always check your answer. Now, there is a way to tell if it's not going to be an answer ahead of time. Here we got x equals 3. Well, if we plug that in to our original equation, we'll erase all the work around this. We get the square root of 4 equals negative 2. But that doesn't make sense because the square root of 4 equals positive 2. So this is not an answer. We get no solution here, or no real solution. So always plug in to check to see if your answer is right. We could have told that here because we should see that a square root can never equal a negative number. So right here you should be able to tell that it's going to be no solution in the end. So here, same thing, just square both sides. We get 4x equals 64, and then divide by 4. And we get x equals 16. Don't really have to check there because we have a square root equaling a positive number, so it should work out right anyways. This one's a little bit different. So since we have a cube root, we have to do the opposite of cubing it, or of a cube root. Like here we have a square root, so we square it. Here we got a cube root, so we have to cube it. So we get x minus 4 equals 3 cubed. 3 cubed is 27. And we add 4. X equals 27 plus 4. So x equals 31. And you can plug it back in. Cube roots, you'll always have an answer for. Okay, so there's never going to be a no solution with a cube root because cube roots are allowed to be negative. Alright, so some slightly harder examples. We have some stuff outside of the radical. Like I said, you always have to isolate the radical first. So we want to get this by itself. Okay? And as if it were x, we're just going to minus 3 to the other side. So we get square root of 4 minus x equals 4 minus 3 is 1. And then we go on to the first step I showed you earlier. You just square both sides since it's a square root, and then solve the equation we get. Now you could tell if it's no solution here. If this equals a negative number, it's no solution. So we get 4 minus x equals 1 squared is still 1. Couple ways we can solve this, but let's minus 4. So we get negative x equals negative 3, and then just divide both by negative 1 and get your answer. So x equals positive 3. Another good thing to do is when you're checking it, make sure the inside doesn't become negative. If the inside is negative, you would have an imaginary answer. We don't do that yet. So we have a cube root of negative 3x equals negative 3. So cube root, you have to cube both sides. So we get negative 3x equals negative 3 times negative 3 times negative 3 is negative 27. And then divide by negative 3. And we get x equals positive 9. Like I said, as long as all your work is right for a cube root or any odd radical, your answer is always going to be right. You don't have to check for no solution. Here we have some extra stuff on the outside of this radical, so we have to move that first. You can square it with the radical. You just got to make sure that would turn into a 4. But it's easier just to deal with it by dividing by 2 and getting the radical by itself. So we get square root of 4x minus 3 equals 8. Then square both sides. Notice this doesn't equal a negative, so our answer is going to be correct. So we get 4x minus 3 equals 64. You add 3 to both sides. So we get 4x equals 67. And then divide by 4. And you can't reduce, so that would be it. So x equals 67 over 4. Once you start having two radicals inside the square roots, you can get multiple answers. Some of them you might have to throw away, so you have to check all your answers. This one's a pretty easy problem, but once they start throwing addition and two radicals, that's when it gets really hard. We'll get to that. So, first step, as always, isolate one of the radicals and then square both sides. So that's already done for us. Then we just get the same equation, but without the radicals. So it's pretty easy to solve. We can move our x to this side or vice versa, however you want. I like to move it so it's positive. So we get 5 equals 2x minus 2. Then add 2 and divide by 2. So 7 equals 2x. And then divide to get our final answer. Okay, so two more examples, and these are the harder ones. So again, for this problem, we want to isolate the radical. So we have a square root of 2x plus 7 minus x equals 2. We want to add x to get the radical by itself. So we get square root of 2x plus 7 equals x plus 2. Then we square both sides. But you gotta remember, we're squaring the entire side. So sadly, this comes down to FOILing. So now we have 2x plus 7 equals x plus 2 times itself. You cannot just square both terms. That is a very common mistake that people get wrong all the time. So we FOIL, and we get x times x is x squared, x times 2 is 2x, 2 times x is 2x, and 2 times 2 is 4. So we can add like terms when we FOIL. So the equation becomes 2x plus 7 equals x squared plus 4x plus 4. Then we move this to the other side. So to do that, we can, since there's an x squared, we can't just solve for x, right? We have to use factoring or the quadratic formula, which we haven't done yet in class. So we're going to minus 2x and we're going to minus 7. So we get 0 equals x squared plus 2x minus 3, which isn't a hard one to factor. All you have to do is try to think of two things that multiply to equal negative 3 that add up to positive 2. So we get 0 equals, what multiplies to equal negative 3 that adds up to 2? Well, that would be a negative 3, or a positive 3, and a negative 1. Right? So that's our answers. That will factor into x plus 3 and x minus 1. And then from there we get two answers. What makes x plus 3 equal to 0? Well, x equals negative 3, comma. What makes x minus 1 equal 0? Well, x equals 1. So that's it for that one. We should check our answers to make sure that neither of them make the square root negative, okay? So if we plug in negative 3, 2 times negative 3 is negative 6, plus 7 is 1, and then if we plug in negative 3 into here, we get positive 4, or 1 plus 3. So this answer is actually no good. Then we plug in 1, and we get square root of 9 is 3, minus 1 is 2. Check. So there's only one answer here because this one didn't work. Alright, so now the last problem, and I had to erase this problem because this one's going to take the rest of the whiteboard. So, again, we isolate one of the radicals, we square both sides. Remember, we're squaring all of this, okay? So we have 4x plus 1 equals 3 plus square root of x minus 2 times itself. Foiling that is not too bad once you get used to it. We have 3 times 3. So we copy this, 4x plus 1 equals 3 times 3 is 9. 3 times square root of x plus 2 is just 3 square root of x minus 2. The insides, that's the same term, and it always will be. And then square root of x minus 2 times square root of x minus 2. Remember, when you square that, you just get the inside. Okay? So we just get square root of x minus 2 times square root of x minus 2 is just x minus 2. Okay? We can add like terms. We have the 9 and the negative 2. And then we have our middle terms. So we have 4x plus 1 equals 9 minus 2 is 7. We're going to put the plus x after that. Combine these. 3 plus 3 is 6. We're going to isolate the radical again. We're going to leave the 6 alone though. So we're going to minus 7 and minus x. So this gives us 3x minus 6 equals 6 square root of x minus 2. So the reason I'm going to leave the 6 with the square root is because if we divide it, we get a fraction, and we don't need to be dealing with fractions. So it's probably best just to leave the number in front of the radical sometimes while you square both sides to get rid of the radical. So we have this times itself. Equals 6 squared is 36, and the square root will disappear. Just make sure you keep that as a group because you have to distribute. So we FOIL and distribute. We get 3x times 3x is 9x squared. 3x times negative 6 is negative 18x. Minus 6 times 3x is negative 18x. Negative 6 times negative 6 is positive 36. Equals 36 times x. And 36 times negative 2 is negative 72. Okay? Now what we want is we want to get everything to one side so we can factor this. Because in the end, if you have an x squared, you're going to either factor or use the quadratic formula. We don't have the quadratic formula yet. So we're going to minus 36x and add 72 over to this side and hope it's factorable. So here we get 9x squared. Negative 18 minus 18 is negative 36. Minus 36 is negative 72. 36 and 72 make 108. So there's a little trick here we can use to make this a little bit easier. If you notice, you don't have to use the trick either, but it does make it way easier. We can divide all these by 9. Or take out a greatest common factor. So we could say 9. Well, we'll just take out a greatest common factor. We won't think of it as dividing everything by 9. Let's actually factor it. So we have 9, and then we have x squared minus 72 divided by 9 is 8x plus 108 divided by 9 is 12 equals 0. Now if you divide the 9 over, 0 divided by 9 is still 0. So that's just going to kind of go away. We don't need it to solve this equation. So all we need now are two things that multiply to equal 12 that add up to negative 8. So what will multiply to equal 12 that adds up to negative 8? Well, that's going to be 6 and 2, and negative 6 and negative 2. So there's our two answers. And you always have to check your answers in the end too. So we're going to get x equals 6, because 6 minus 6 is 0, times anything is 0. So that makes it true. And then x equals 2. And if we plug in either of these, we're right. So these are both correct. And that's the end of the video for today. Thanks for watching.